So this campus exists only for graduate level students, and it exists only for students that want to study international economics, international environmental law, international peace and security, international relations, etc. Reach out and speak to different students that you see here on campus. So the issues that you guys are studying are the exact same issues that many of the students are studying here, and we really want you guys to make the most of being in this place. You're not just debating here because this is just a place where you can debate. You're debating here because this is a place where the students that are very interested in these topics come.
We're from the Bay Area. We have a debate conference in the Morrissey building, I believe.
You're debating on opioids?
There's increasing FDA regulations on releasing things like oxycodone.
What
And then
grades
there's
are you
talking
guys
about
like
middle school.
I'm 6th grade.
Wow, that's not what I was doing in 6th grade. That's impressive.
Study Russian as well?
Yeah, advanced. 18 years.
We're going to be talking about geoengineering. Are there any motions from the floor?
Motion to open debate.
By the ayes of the chair, that passes, and we're opening debate.
Climate change is one of the biggest threats to modern society, if not the biggest. The UK believes that change must come soon, in the form of geoengineering.
I believe that the solution that we must come to must be a combination of cutting back on emissions and also using geoengineering and other forms of capturing carbon.
Well, South Korea believes that further research would be important to discuss whether or not there might be harmful side effects regarding some of these geoengineering technologies.
Australia depends on its coal mines. 60% of our jobs are coal miners, and they make money from that to provide shelter and food for their families.
Canada supports geoengineering and anti-climate change precautions as long as they are sustainable and do not bring negative implications to the environment in the future.
Nigel would like to see a committee in the UN that oversees the regulation of these geoengineering techniques to ensure that no country uses these as power over other countries first.
On the topic of who will be most affected by climate change, Japan believes that it is a very vulnerable country to climate change given that it's an island, it's surrounded by water. There's lots of problems with climate change that directly affect like the ocean, such as rising sea levels and ocean acidification.
It's not really a question of whether or not which countries it's going to affect. It's going to affect the whole entire world. Like, it's not just specifically going to affect Japan. It's not going to be Japan, the only country that gets flooded. It's going to be everybody. It's going to hurt everyone. So I honestly see no reason why everyone would not be supporting this resolution.
Even landlocked small countries like Liechtenstein are being affected by global warming. Being at the foot of the Alps, we have been noticing a lot of snow depleting from the tops of the mountains lately.
Geoengineering might have a little potential, but right now, it's just not it. There's other things we can do, like such as reducing our carbon emissions or planting more trees. We don't have to do something as drastic as Montenegro suggested, like geoengineering. We don't need to change our entire planet's climate that has existed for billions of years.
Although the climate has existed for quite a very long time, it has already been changed by humans to prevent further changing of it.
Climate change is not going to wait for us to come and solve it. It's happening whether we like it or not, and it's happening quickly. If we want to find a solution, we need to find it quickly, and the only way to do that is to have research done by individual countries.
All those in favor of a 6-minute Monterey caucus discussing whether states or an international body should be regulating and studying geoengineering. By the ayes of the chair, that passes.
Having united resources would bolster the research effort and could make geoengineering a very, very, very plausible solution to these rising temperatures.
Would also help with funding. No single nation would have to fund experiments entirely by themselves.
Humans together created this climate change problem, and so humans together are going to have to fix it.
All right, all those in favor of a 10-minute unmoderated caucus, please raise your placards. The ayes of the chair, this passes.
Make some discovery, that other nations have not and you do not share, maybe it allows you to have more control over geoengineering, or you have like a more potent form that has more quick impact results. You could use that to target specific nations. Like geoengineering, there's some concern that it targets nations in like sub-Saharan Africa, I think it is, and makes them a lot drier. You could do that with the information that you get.
To share your research or to not share your research, essentially this just provides infrastructure for countries to work with one another to solve climate change. Without this, every single country would basically be researching on its own, and this just provides them a pool to share the research.
The rising in temperatures has already struck many countries. It's happening right now. Mali has lost almost 12,000 acres of land, and their economy is almost solely based on their crop production. It is hurting countries now. We need to act.
Incentives for planting more plants that consume more CO2, such as the pine, eastern black walnut, and Douglas fir.
Aren't you guys encouraging planting invasive species of trees all across the globe? Wouldn't that be damaging towards certain ecosystems?
We are planting trees and we are doing things that will naturally return the earth back to the cycle that it should be in.
Carbon farming isn't used right now is because it's too expensive and it's not like incentivized, but we are incentivizing that.
It would allow farmers to be more funded and therefore plant more plants to increase efficiency in the economy.
Planting trees is something that is safe and can be agreed to be safe by every single country in this room, and it is also not a huge monumental step.
But when are these steps going to end and when are we going to get there? And a couple hundred trees is not going to make the largest difference, but I feel like it could make a small difference.
All right, all those in favor of the resolution, please raise your placards. 1, 2, 3. All those opposed to the resolution, please raise your placard.
Can we abstain?
The resolution passes. Congratulations.
Say, for example, you have a lot of carbon-producing factories and different gases that are being shot into the environment, and just by planting trees is not an effective and long-term solution to getting rid of the problem that is currently facing us.
Space mirrors, they basically reflect a lot of the solar radiation that is produced by the sun.
I think that geoengineering should be considered as an offset to emissions. I do not think you have to do geoengineering and emissions at the same time.
But if we really want to get down to the point and stop the global temperatures from rising in the future, we should probably consider setting like regulations and rules on how much greenhouse gases we put into our atmosphere. Because that's the whole cause. That's the whole reason we're debating about this in the first place.
Many countries, notably Australia, rely on things such as coal mines, and Mexico ourselves, we rely on fossil fuels. So it'd be potentially crippling to our economy to cut down on our emissions, because that would assume that we would start using less fossil fuels, which is the main source of energy.
You guys won't have an economy when this world is not livable anymore because we're not doing stuff now that we need to be doing.
And there's no way for us to transition over to clean energy either when geoengineering is in place. Say, for example, we want to do solar. If we put in solar radiation management, which blocks sun rays coming into the earth, then our solar will not be nearly as effective as oil, and we will run out of energy and our economy will crash. That's what I'm saying, is that geoengineering and reducing carbon emissions, they really cannot coexist.
But I have a solution. There's a machine, a size of a trailer you see that a truck driving. It takes in carbon dioxide and it turns it into jet fuel.
Carbon emissions do need to be lowered, regardless of our industries. Our industries don't matter as much as the climate or the environment or this earth.
Well, if Australia gets rid of its coal mines, then people lose their jobs, which they don't make money for shelter or food.
If we made like a committee or like a coalition to fund a slow transition to solar energy, then we wouldn't be shutting down the CO2 emissions, and we could slowly start to make the earth clean again.
we're back. Are there any motions to the floor?
In the eyes of Russia, we believe that solar radiation management seems like one of the better forms of geoengineering, since it wouldn't hurt carbon emissions.
There'll be disruption of monsoons, and it ruins satellite sensing. There's so many issues with this.
Mexico would also like to encourage heavy regulation and research on solar radiation management methods.
As of now, the only thing we really have is cutting carbon emissions, which would hurt a lot of economies, and or planting trees, which we would have to plant a lot to save our environment.
We do not simply know what would happen, like how plants might react to this reduced sunlight, how plants have genetically grown to accept this amount of sunlight. We do not simply know the side effects of what could happen by putting an artificial substance that this earth would not have put itself into the environment and putting aerosols into the sky and doing all these horrible things without researching it first.
Aerosols do inhibit solar panels' ability to provide energy, and that's something that we really need. A lot of nations are heavily dependent on solar energy, and aerosols would really, really cut down on the amount they're able to do. And solar mirrors do not have that negative effect. Thank
It's
you.
extremely difficult to test space mirrors because it costs so much money to launch a space mirror in the first place, and I think that's just not a very feasible solution at the moment.
All right, welcome back. We're debating again.
Yay.
Just to make sure we're all on the same page, this is a fairly famous graph of climate change. It tracks carbon emissions and the global temperature, and it shows the hockey puck, where you have industrialization and then suddenly the global temperature starts increasing. These are the states that joined the Paris Climate Accord. The United States is still a state party. The United States has said we are withdrawing, but because of how the treaty is written, the United States cannot start withdrawing until 3 years after they signed and after it went into force.
Solar radiation management, which is a type of climate engineering which seeks to reflect sunlight and thus reduces global warming. Space mirrors. Space mirrors are an anti-global warming measure that is a proposed technology for climate change mitigation by the deflection of sunlight.
Urges countries to remove fossil fuel subsidies to fund geoengineering research projects. Subpoint A. The money they retain from not funding fossil fuel subsidies will be redirected towards the research of CO2 injection, giant space mirrors, reflective aerosols, cloud seeding, and other promising emerging technologies.
I believe this bill is inefficient as we have our fossil fuel subsidies for a reason. We can set aside different amounts of money for geoengineering research, but we do not need to give up some of our money that we're already putting to another cause for geoengineering. We can find that money some other way.
Since fossil fuels is one of the biggest parts of the Russian economy, taking money away from that could seriously damage our economy.
Okay, so in the Real Resolution Act, and those are the sponsors, urges countries to remove fossil fuel subsidies to fund geoengineering. The money they retain from not funding fossil fuel subsidies will be redirected towards the research of CO2 injection, giant space mirrors, reflective aerosol, cloud seeding, scrubbers, and other promising emerging technologies.
If the committee finds any technologies that have been fully researched, including possible geological effects, they may take steps in coordination with the UN to implement these technologies. These are by case scenarios, because you can't regulate all of these technologies if only you say, for example, a certain kind of rule that fits all of them.
If it's not mandatory, how will you incentivize people other than the fact that it'll help reduce climate change?
The whole point of this committee is to debate how we can find solutions to this, not whether or not countries are going to pledge their support to these solutions. Because if we can find say, for example, a solution to these problems, I think we've accomplished our job very well.
All right, states wishing to speak against it. Saudi Arabia. You have the floor, Saudi Arabia.
This bill completely ignores the needs of countries such as myself that are our economies are entirely based off of fossil fuels such as oil and coal. I understand that it gives you a choice, and that's just the point. With a choice, this bill accomplishes nothing.
In order to fix climate change, we need progress. And one of the ways this progress can happen is through the research of geoengineering and then the legalization
of those processes.
All right, all those in favor of this resolution, please raise your placards now. 5, 6, 7. This resolution fails.
Acknowledging that many countries' economy depends on oil producing, coal mining, and other occupations that contribute to global warming.
See, urging states to put a 10% tax on products made by factories in that region that do not have scrubbers on all exhaust streams.
How much is a scrubber for these factories?
They are $1.47 per kilowatt hour.
So where are you getting all this money for these grants?
From the UNEP budget, as well as recommended voluntary donations from other countries.
So for the scrubbers, what if so it's $10,000 just for scrubbers? What if one factory needs to buy 10 scrubbers and one factory only needs to buy 2? Do they get the same amount of money?
We can amend that so they get 10,000 USD each scrubber required.
Yes.
This could drive many people out of jobs, and then their families have to suffer as well.
It's extraordinarily unfeasible to be paying $2.7 million per smokestack.
My placard just moved.
For the approximately 10 million factories across the globe. If you do the math, that comes out to a minimal. That's if each factory only has one smokestack. A minimal of $1 trillion. This bill will crash the economy and destroy the world before global warming ever will.
Oh yeah! All those in favor of the resolution, raise your placard. All those abstaining, please raise your placard. This bill fails. Those wishing to speak in favor of the resolution, please raise your placard.
SILVOPASTURE is a beneficial organic solution that doesn't conflict at all with any other bill. It only contributes to reducing carbon in the atmosphere. It also benefits the land and livestock by offsetting the methane released.
I just think that this bill is super convoluted for how it's going to actually give these grants. And also, it's just super redundant since we literally passed a bill yesterday that does pretty much the exact same thing.
All those in favor of the resolution, raise your placards now.
Many carbons are developed to filter out carbon dioxide and turn it into jet fuel.
You know, the amount of CO2 that is captured to create the jet fuel is the same amount that is burned. So you are literally doing nothing to help the environment. In fact, you are hurting the environment by wasting precious money that could be used in a more cost-effective and efficient way.
That match emissions from here to Charles de Gaulle Airport in France, which is almost twice the distance, it uses as much pollutants as a flight from here to DC.
So you're saying this jet fuel is more...
It's clean, very clean.
If this solution, which seems so simple, so easy, just to convert carbon and add hydrogen into clean biofuel, why isn't it already in effect? I don't believe
there
that
are
this is true.
There are a couple of units in service already.
I would like to support this bill and ask my support for this bill because of the fact that it is a right step in the right direction.
If we're gonna make these bills, it has to be, instead of having like blanket statements saying we're gonna regulate all of these types of geoengineering under one bill. Instead, what we should have is like bills that specifically go after one sort of form of geoengineering, like one bill regulating aerosols, one bill regulating giant space mirrors, etc. Thank you.
There's a solar radiation management resolution. Important definition, solar radiation management is the climate engineering that will reduce the amount of solar radiation that reaches Earth, attempting to counteract the effects of climate change.
This bill prevents countries from using solar radiation management on a scale that affects the international community.
All those in favor of tabling this motion and moving on, please raise your placards now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That passes. We're now moving on to carbon removal.
As of now, it seems like most of the forms of carbon removal are either take too slow or simply just inefficient and expensive. So I think that instead of trying to put these things in place, we should just have more research into these things instead of trying to shove these things into use already when they just seem to be sort of prototypes and not like very useful.
There are some winds that do take in enough carbon, and currently if we construct a small amount of those and then proceed to continue research, we can hit it twice, so we can have some right now and then some later that will be more efficient, and that will effectively stop climate change, and that's effectively what my bill is doing right now.
And I really believe this is the best bill because it prohibits us using these methods until they are researched and approved. And I just feel that needs to happen in order to keep us safe and healthy.
We are going to begin with our closing ceremonies. Delegates were selected specifically by their chairs for aspects of leadership, but also negotiation, caring, kindness, who works behind the scenes, and how closely you stay behind policy, whether you're a moderate or a more extreme position. So for all of those traits, that's the reason those delegates were selected to speak. I was going around Monterey in different meetings with different professors. I was also speaking to students that are taking classes precisely on what the Geoengineering Committee did this weekend. So I mention this because the topics that you guys are debating and did debate over this debate conference are very heavy, serious topics that adults today have not been able to solve and oftentimes get gridlocked in debate session, very similarly to how the full Senate did today and UNEP and other times this weekend.
Better research makes you a better delegate and a better debater. This is because if you have good research and good reasoning, it's a lot easier to get your points across and to be heard. So my advice to future delegates who come to LCM is to research, just so you can be the best delegate you can.
Delegates with knowledge better further their beliefs and thus are more relevant and persuasive to the committee. The purpose of research is to convince others that your solution to the problem is valid and should be taken into action.
What allowed me to stay both on policy and still make progress in this debate was working with others to find topics we did agree on and building from there. Putting aside conflicting views on regulations in order to work on a different topic that we could agree on allowed me to move forward and make an impact in the debate without straying too far from my own policy.
Geoengineering is essentially ways of trying to combat climate change by changing the planet. And it took on a lot more imminence and a lot more urgency after the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change released a report saying that even if states live up to their most ambitious targets that they set for themselves at the Paris Climate Conference, we are still going to have substantial problems when the climate warms. And we have about 12 years to stop that. A lot of people started being creative. And they started coming up with solutions that sounded a little outlandish, literally in the case of space mirrors. And some of them that just seemed too good to be true. This was an actual issue that was debated in Nairobi this year. And this is something that the world is looking at very seriously. There are people throughout the world who are working in Nairobi, working at research institutions, at universities, addressed as well. And that's something that is the real world, is frustration. It's dealing with that frustration and moving on, pushing on to be a better delegate, to have more research, to have more data, and to eventually find a solution that people can agree with.